key that I'm bringing to you guys today is this movie that came out on Netflix called Jogi. It was a Netflix original directed by Ali Abbas Zafar, and it's a movie that tells about the Anti-Sikh Riots of 1984, June 1984. And I'll tell you, whenever I'm watching any Hindi cinema or any Bollywood cinema, I'm always learning historical events about India. So this was one that I had not heard of, and actually got to learn a lot, not only through the movie itself, but they're doing some research afterwards. So the movie follows the story of a character named Jogi. He's the titular character, and he is essentially the leader of his lane, his neighborhood. And in June 1984, after Operation Blue Star, the I want to say is it the Prime Minister of India? Is that correct? Was assassinated by
That was
two.
Indira Gandhi.
Exactly. Assassinated by two of her Sikh bodyguards, and essentially, the state of India had gone through these anti-Sikh riots, which took the lives of anywhere between 8,000 to 17,000 Sikhs. And Jogi was depicting this event in a little bit of a different way. So, like I said, Jogi's the leader of his village, and after these riots, his neighborhood is heavily affected. His brother-in-law, in fact, was actually burned alive in his shop, and the neighborhood is in shambles. And so they flee to a local temple, and they're figuring out what they will do, how they will stay alive during this period of chaos. So Jogi takes it upon himself to actually transfer some of these members of his neighborhood to a nearby city that is outside of Delhi, Sikh dominant, and a safe haven. Exactly. And it's really just telling the story of how he's able to do this with his friends. One of his friends is a police officer who kind of helps him navigate through this. And since his friend's a police officer, we see a lot of like the inner workings and the politics in India at the time, or at least depicted in the movie. However, I will say that this movie isn't a 100% clear depiction. In fact, I think it fell quite short from giving a true depiction, or at least telling the entire story. Whenever I did my own research outside of this, I learned quite a bit more, not only on the context of these events, but also too of their aftermath. So, I really want to pass the baton off to either Shreya or Amir that, may know a little bit more about this event than I did. I certainly did a lot of research, and in terms of the movie, I thought it fell short of a little bit. Can go into a bit more, but just wanted to hear some other thoughts real quick.
Do you want to give them a history lesson? Then I'll give them what I thought about it.
So what had happened earlier in 1983-ish, or 1984, I'm not sure about the exact year, but it was the 80s, was that a lot of terrorists, separatists from the Sikh community were hiding in the Golden Temple in Amritsar. And what Indira Gandhi did was to push them out. She allowed the army to get into the temple, which damaged the temple as well. So there was a lot of antagonism against that move. It was termed authoritarian. It was termed completely insensitive. And all that condemnation that came to Indira Gandhi because of her sending these troops inside the Golden Temple became a very big grudge within the Sikh community, who thought that she did not respect their religion. And she had two Sikh bodyguards who literally turned around one fine morning and shot her dead, point blank. So this is how Indira Gandhi died. And when she died, there was horror in the country, because imagine your prime minister or your president being killed by their own secret service, and point blank with guns. So there was a huge, rollback because of her death. The entire country went into shock. And after a few hours, this entire scene started where people started, going after the Sikh community, blaming them for Indira Gandhi's massacre. And all of this that happens is the day it happens, because when the movie starts, they don't know what's happened. So they're literally sitting in a bus going somewhere, and then the news hits the waves that Indira Gandhi has been shot dead, and they're not even given tickets to their destination. They're asked to literally they're ostracized from the community. So all of that starts. The movie really starts with that entire sequel. Shreya, what did you feel about the movie?
So I think that given the fact that I actually did know about the 1984 massacres, I think that this movie does the same thing as some of the more like modern patriotic movies where we've seen where they show everything as like one-sided. Like I definitely agree with Michael's viewpoint on the fact that it's very one-sided. So let's like if regardless of what the topic is always like India versus Pakistan, like the Sikh, the Kashmir pundits, like whatever it is, it always shows it as a one side and it's just like complete horror, complete killings, complete massacres, genocide, in the sense that like they refuse to kind of talk about what happened to bring about this type of like this brainwashing within the society in the first place, right? They're just like, oh, it exists and we are killing them. I'm like, but you fail to talk about like why it happened. Why did the anti-Sikhism concept come about? Like who in political figureheads like led to this problem? Why is it so like prominent in society? And I think that that leads to all these little gaps in this movie when we're watching it, where if you don't know the context of like why people like, I guess like people would hate the Sikhs, you're left with a little bit of a loss. Like you're left without that motivation. You're just watching people get killed with the understanding that you're like, oh my gosh, it's horrible, but you never understand why, like what is truly happening and what is truly keeping these people committing these crimes.
Yeah, the movie really expects you to know the history.
Yeah.
It expects you to know what's going on with the politics of it. But what I would want to tell everybody, and because we're reviewing it here, is that the politics behind how the politicians got together from Indira Gandhi's party, which is the Congress party, and how they're complicit in killing, slaughtering of Sikhs and the attacks in the homes and businesses all over Delhi and in communities. It's very well documented in news and media and academia. It's hugely documented. However, the movie does not provide context to people who are unaware of that background. And that's why Michael and you, Shreya, both had to research it. Right?
Yeah, well, and for those that don't know too, like just to provide context on this film, the main antagonist is, I want to say the main antagonist, I honestly forgot the name, but he's a police chief that releases a bunch of inmates and weaponizes them, funds them to go and destroy neighborhoods and villages. And it was done in this very one-dimensional way in which you're just kind of looking at like a pure evil villain, but it didn't really talk about any of these political collusions that were happening within the time and how in only the matter of 3 days, anywhere from 8,000 to potentially 17,000 people were absolutely massacred before the Indian military had stepped in. So like,
you're right, Michael. And basically the local legislator that you are alluding to was Tejpal Arora in the movie, and played by Mukund Mishra, is actually modeled on a Congress leader called Sajjan Kumar. And the guy really did all of that.
Got it.
Got it. And he's not, he wasn't the only politician at that point in time using the voters list to select targets and treat the riots as a stepping stone to a greater role in the government, but he was one of them. But they modeled it around Sajjan Kumar.
Yeah, and the last thing too is that these political members in history were not necessarily penalized, or there was not a ton of justice brought to those that were involved in this. And the alienation of the Sikh community continued to persist even after these riots. The exact things that may have happened, I'm unsure, but I know that the alienation definitely would have occurred to keep persisting if the proper justice was not brought about. And I don't think that this movie quite was able to address the aftermath of these events as well. As I'm not a member of the Sikh community, I can't really talk to it, but I do know that it certainly did not bring to justice from what I was able to see what actually happened in my own research.
What I also felt was that the entire romantic angle really undercuts everything that the movie builds up towards. It's such a distraction from the main story, and it's